The National Basketball Association has had plenty of odd, intriguing, or otherwise eyebrow-raising storylines in its over 7 decades of existence. But today, we're going to be taking a look at 10 of the most surprising, forgotten about, or in a lot of cases, forgettable moments where star players teamed up to play together on the same team. So, let me tell you an NBA blurb about some of the most surprising pairs of teammates in the history of the NBA. Starting with number 10, we're going straight to the GOAT. Michael Jordan and George Gervin. As many of you most likely know, Michael Jordan was a transcendent player that became the face of the league in short order. With high-flying dunks and a dominant overall game, it's easy to see how he quickly put himself on the NBA map. But in just his second year in the league, he had one of the only major setbacks in his entire career. In just the third game of the 1986 season against the Golden State Warriors, Jordan broke a bone in his left foot, causing him to miss 64 of the 82 games that year. That year, however, was the only year he had an opportunity to play with teammate George Gervin, the Iceman, a talented guard forward known for his slick moves and effortless finger roll layups. The 1986 season would be the final 82 games for the Iceman's career, and unfortunately, he only got to play with Michael Jordan in 18 of those due to the injury, which is in part why this duo is often forgotten about. Gervin was actually traded to the Chicago Bulls after missing multiple preseason workouts over the possibility of being benched by new Spurs coach Cotton Fitzsimmons. Michael Jordan actually stated he was unhappy after the trade, perhaps adding another reason why this pairing was forgotten about. Number 9. Vince Carter and Hakeem Olajuwon. In the early 2000s, Vince Carter was busy at work putting the Toronto Raptors on the map. His effortless and electric dunk stunned fans all across the world. But in 2001, it was clear he couldn't win it all alone. He had recently lost his distant cousin Tracy McGrady when he signed with the Orlando Magic, and the Raptors had lost in the 2001 playoffs to the Philadelphia 76ers. In an effort to try and improve the team, the Toronto Raptors made a trade with the Houston Rockets to acquire aging superstar Hakeem Olajuwon. Olajuwon had been disgruntled with Houston at this point in his career, wanting a big contract extension offer that just was not being put on the table. Toronto shelled out a first and second round pick for Olajuwon, both of which failed to turn into any good players for the Rockets, and gave him an $18 million 3-year extension. But over the course of the 2002 season, it was clear that Olajuwon's best playing days were far behind him, and doubled with increasing injury, Hakeem decided to hang it up after only 1 year with Vince Carter and the Toronto Raptors. Vince Carter would go down late in the season with a knee injury and wouldn't play at all in that year's playoffs. The Raptors lost to the Pistons in 5 games in the first round and thus ended the Hakeem Olajuwon era in Toronto. Number 8. Steve Nash, Jason Kidd, and Kevin Johnson. In 1988, point guard Kevin Johnson was involved in a trade from the Cleveland Cavaliers to the Phoenix Suns. In his years playing for the Suns, Kevin Johnson blossomed into a talented point guard that frequently averaged over 20 points and 10 assists a night, oftentimes alongside Charles Barkley up until the 1997 NBA season when Barkley left for the Houston Rockets. In that year, Kevin Johnson averaged 20 points, 9 assists, 3 rebounds, and 1.5 steals a game. In the 1996 NBA draft leading into that year, a 22-year-old Steve Nash, a bright mind and accomplished college player, was drafted 15th overall by the Phoenix Suns, joining Kevin Johnson's Suns team. For most of that 1997 NBA season, Steve Nash struggled to get playing time, playing behind talented point guards Kevin Johnson and Sam Cassell, and that minute situation only would continue to get worse for Nash. In the same year, the Dallas Mavericks were having internal issues between their talented point guard Jason Kidd and fellow teammates and coaching staff, leading to the difficult decision to trade the former co-rookie of the year in only his 3rd season to the Phoenix Suns in a deal that included Sam Cassell, leaving the Suns with a short point guard backcourt of Kevin Johnson and Jason Kidd, with Steve Nash coming off the bench struggling to find minutes where he could. In the end, they never got too far together, never getting past the first round in 97 and 98. In the 1999 season, Kevin Johnson retired for a year and Steve Nash was traded to Dallas, leading to an end for this trio of teammates. Number 7. Charles Barkley, Julius Erving, and Moses Malone. In 1976, the American Basketball Association was set to merge with the NBA. 4 teams, the New York Nets, Denver Nuggets, Indiana Pacers, and San Antonio Spurs, were set to join the NBA as fully fledged teams. One of these teams, the New York Nets, had Julius Erving under contract. When the Nets officially joined the NBA, they were immediately under fire from the New York Knicks, claiming they had invaded their territory, and the Knicks demanded $4.8 million in compensation, a figure worth about $21 million in today's economy. Due to these demands, Nets owner Roy Bowe pulled back on a prior offer to raise Dr. J's salary, and it led to a fallout, eventually leading to him being traded to the Philadelphia 76ers for the cash to cover the fee. A fun side fact here is that the Nets offered Dr. J to the Knicks in return for waiving the fee, but the Knicks declined it. A few years later, in the 1982 offseason, talented big man Moses Malone was a restricted free agent for the Houston Rockets. That offseason, Malone signed a 6-year, $13.2 million offer sheet with the Philadelphia 76ers, who were looking to upgrade their center position, having just lost in the NBA Finals to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and the Lakers. The Houston Rockets franchise was sold to new ownership that offseason, and the new owners of the Rockets came to decide that Moses Malone's $2 million annual contract simply did not fit their plans, going ahead and matching the contract, but only as a bluff to demand a first-round pick from the 76ers. This allowed for the chairman of the boards to join Dr. J, Maurice Cheeks, and the rest of the highly talented 1982 Philadelphia 76ers, who would go on to steamroll their way to a championship that season. Earlier in 1978, the Philadelphia 76ers traded high-scoring guard World B. Free to the San Diego Clippers in exchange for promising young player Phil Smith and a 1984 first-round pick. As it turns out, the Clippers did poorly in the 1983 NBA season, leading to the Philadelphia 76ers having a very high pick. With that pick, they selected the round mound of rebound, Charles Barkley, at number 5 in the 1984 NBA draft, despite his best efforts to not be drafted by them over concerns relating to their cap situation and the contract Barkley could receive. Moses Malone helped Barkley along in his development in the NBA, and the Philadelphia 76ers with Malone, Dr. J, and Barkley saw some success, making it to the Eastern Conference Finals in Barkley's rookie year and in the Eastern Conference Semifinals in his second year. In the 1986 offseason, Moses Malone was traded to the Washington Bullets. The Dr. J and Barkley-led 76ers would lose that year in the first round to the Milwaukee Bucks. Dr. J would then go on to retire after that season, coming to an end of this pairing. Number 6. Tracy McGrady, Grant Hill, and Patrick Ewing. The offseason of 2000 was an extremely exciting time for the Orlando Magic. The Detroit Pistons signed and traded forward Grant Hill to the Magic in exchange for Chucky Atkins and Ben Wallace. That same offseason, the Magic signed budding superstar Tracy McGrady to a 6-year, $67.5 million contract in the hopes to team him up with Grant Hill and become the league's next dominant duo. They even nearly signed Tim Duncan away from the Spurs during this offseason. This, unfortunately, never worked out quite as planned, as Grant Hill experienced a high amount of devastating injuries during his time with the Orlando Magic. Just before the second year of the McGrady-Hill duo, the Magic signed aging 39-year-old center Patrick Ewing to a 2-year deal. This would end up being his last year in the NBA, however, as he agreed to a buyout after the season and retired. He went on to average 6 points and 4 rebounds a game that year for the Magic, coming off the bench for the first time in his career in 65 games for the Magic. Grant Hill would only play in 14 games that year, and Tracy McGrady would go on to average 25 points and lead the Magic to a 44-38 record, but lose in the first round to the Charlotte Hornets. Number 5. Scottie Pippen, Charles Barkley, and Hakeem Olajuwon. In the 1984 NBA draft, legendary center Hakeem the Dream Olajuwon was drafted first overall by a controversial Houston Rockets team who had been accused of tanking to land the first overall pick. Hakeem would go on to be one of the most skilled and talented players in the NBA's history, posting career averages of 21 points, 11 rebounds, 2.5 assists, 1.7 steals, and 3 blocks a game. He could do it all. In 1996, Charles Barkley was on the Suns, averaging 23 points and 11 rebounds. The Suns only managed to put up a 41-41 record, losing in the first round. He'd be dealt that offseason to the Houston Rockets in exchange for Sam Cassell, who was later part of the Jason Kidd trade mentioned earlier, Robert Horry, Mark Bryant, and Chucky Brown. For the next 4 seasons he spent in the NBA with Houston, Charles Barkley would be riddled with injuries, never managing to play more than 68 games in any year. The Rockets would lose in the Western Finals in 1997 and in the first round in 1998. In 1999, in an effort to continue to try and improve the team, the Houston Rockets made a sign-and-trade deal for defensive legend Scottie Pippen, trading just Roy Rogers and a second-round draft pick. But immediately issues arose. Team chemistry was at an all-time low, and the duo of Barkley and Pippen could just not get along, leading to Pippen requesting a trade just a year into his 6-year, $67.2 million deal with the Rockets. Charles Barkley would openly criticize Pippen by saying, "For him to want to leave after 1 year, it disappointed me greatly. The Rockets went out of their way to get Scottie and the fans have treated him well, so I was just disappointed in him." Pippen retaliated in an interview by saying, "I wouldn't give Charles Barkley an apology at gunpoint. He can never expect an apology from me. If anything, he owes me an apology for coming to play with his fat butt." Needless to say, this combo's results was one that made people want to forget. Number 4, Dirk Nowitzki and Amar Stoudemire. This circumstance, which saw 2 of the best power forwards of the 2000s team up, was chosen only for its potential to surprise the average basketball fan. While it may make for a great question in a game of basketball trivia, it otherwise was pretty much entirely forgettable. In the 1998 NBA draft, Dirk Nowitzki was drafted 9th overall by the Milwaukee Bucks and immediately traded to the Dallas Mavericks, where he'd play all 20 of his Hall of Fame-worthy NBA seasons, including winning a championship in 2011. Amar Stoudemire was a force to be reckoned with all throughout the mid to late 2000s and a deadly duo with Steve Nash until the signing with New York in 2010. After one near MVP candidate-worthy season, he began being plagued by injury and over the years saw his role reduced with the Knicks, culminating in his eventual buyout with the team late in the 2015 NBA season to seek better opportunity elsewhere. He shortly afterwards signed a minimum deal to play the rest of the year with Dirk Nowitzki and the Dallas Mavericks. In a somewhat forgettable 23 games for the Mavericks, he averaged fairly solid numbers, putting up 10 points and almost 4 rebounds a game in 16 minutes off the bench. The Mavericks made the playoffs in 2015, but fell in the first round in just 5 games to the Dwight Howard and James Harden-led Houston Rockets. The next year, Amar signed with the Miami Heat, and then after that fell out of the league, going overseas to play in Jerusalem, and recently in the Big Three. Number 3, Shaq, Kobe, and Dennis Rodman. There's actually a few names you could attach to the Shaq and Kobe combo. They seem to attract a number of aging superstars over their years together, such as Gary Payton and Karl Malone, but I think one of the more interesting teammates they shared was Dennis Rodman. In the 1996 NBA draft, the Charlotte Hornets drafted Kobe Bean Bryant with a 13th overall pick and immediately was traded in a pre-planned deal to the Lakers for Vlade Divac. That same month, the Los Angeles Lakers lured center Shaquille O'Neal away from the Orlando Magic with a big 7-year, $121 million deal. From there, the Shaq and Kobe duo was born, and they were on their way. By 1999, the Chicago Bulls had fully entered rebuild mode, having exited the Michael Jordan era. This led to Dennis Rodman being released by the Bulls in January of 1999. Before the start of the lockout-shortened 1999 NBA season, Dennis Rodman signed with the Los Angeles Lakers. He'd go on to only play 23 games for the Lakers, averaging 2 points and 11 rebounds a game. Rodman, as expected, had some controversies in his short time with the Lakers. He stated after the fact that he couldn't handle the constant arguing going on between Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe Bryant, comparing it to a couple kids constantly arguing and complaining about everything, and even had a stretch where he took 2 weeks off from the team to contemplate his basketball future and gamble in Las Vegas. He was eventually released for some obvious reasons. He would sign with the Dallas Mavericks the next year, and after causing controversy there as well, fell out of the league beyond that point. To sum it all up, it was fairly forgettable and not very memorable. Number 2, Pistol Pete Maravich and Larry Bird. In 1978, Larry Bird was drafted 6th overall by the Boston Celtics. Red Auerbach knew Larry Bird was worth the gamble at this spot, knowing full well that Bird would remain in college one more season before actually joining the Celtics. After signing Larry Bird to a 5-year, $3.25 million contract, which was the highest rookie contract in NBA history at the time, by the way, he showed why he was worth it, averaging 21 points, 10 rebounds, 4 assists, and 1.7 steals a game, leading the Boston Celtics as a rookie. In that very same season Larry Bird kicked off his NBA career, Pistol Pete Maravich's was coming to a close. Pistol Pete had been with the Jazz for 6 seasons now and had been their leading scorer by a large margin. But by 1980, Maravich's knees were starting to give him some serious trouble, to the point where he couldn't practice much. New Jazz head coach Tom Nasalk had a rule at the time where players who didn't practice couldn't play in games, and so Maravich sat out a lot of that season to the dismay of him and fans alike. The Jazz would eventually waive him during the season, and he signed with the top team in the league that year, the Boston Celtics, led by rookie Larry Bird. Maravich played the role of the sixth man. His job was to come off the bench firing, and he helped Larry Bird and the Celtics post a 61-21 record, and Maravich got to play in the playoffs for the first time since 1973 when he played for the Hawks. Sadly, the Celtics were defeated by the Dr. J-led 76ers in the Eastern Conference Finals, and Pistol Pete went on to retire after that season, knowing full well that the condition of his knees wouldn't improve. And number 1, Bob Cousy and Oscar Robertson. This pair of teammates is one of the more interesting stories I found when researching this topic. The reason being, Bob Cousy's first year in the NBA was 1950. The year he played with Oscar Robertson, 1970. Now, a 20-year career isn't crazy uncommon, especially for an NBA great, but the circumstances around this pairing was definitely one of the most uncommon I've ever seen. Oscar Robertson, also known as the Big O or even sometimes Mr. Triple Double, was a talented point guard that played from 1960 to 1974, and he was very well known for the longest time as being the only player to ever average a triple-double in a season, by posting 30 points, 12.5 rebounds, and 11 assists in just his second year in the league for the Cincinnati Royals. By his 10th year, he was a 10-time All-Star, made the playoffs 7 out of those 10, and posted some insane stats along the way. But that 10th year was also somewhat special for another reason. Bob Cousy is an NBA legend that played point guard for the Boston Celtics in the earliest days of the NBA. He had a great career, averaging 18 points a game, 7.5 assists, and 5 rebounds. And he played a part in the legendary frequent champion Boston Celtics squad, winning 6 championships during his career and eventually retiring in 1963 at the age of 34. Retiring for 6 years, that is. In retirement, Cousy had become coach of Boston College, but over the years grew bored of college basketball and decided to make his return to the NBA. But this time as the head coach of the Cincinnati Royals. When asked why he did this, he claimed he did it for the money. He was made an offer he couldn't refuse, which is kind of understandable in my opinion. In another engagement for money more or less, and in this case in a stunt to drive up ticket sales, he agreed to return to the court as a player at 41 years of age and having not played a single NBA game in over 6 years. He appeared in just 7 games late in the 1969-1970 season, only posting 5 points total in all of those games combined and playing just 34 minutes total as well. The stunt paid off though, as ticket sales increased 77% despite the incredibly rough performance Cousy was putting on. The Royals would go on to finish the year with a 36-46 record, not qualifying for the playoffs. After those games were over, he'd officially retire for good, and he remained the coach of the team until the 1974 NBA season, after which he officially stepped down. Oscar Robertson, on the other hand, was traded after the 1970 season in a shocking trade to the Milwaukee Bucks, supposedly due to Bob Cousy's jealousy of Robertson's attention, letting Robertson team up with superstar center Lou Alcindor. They'd go on to win an NBA championship that same season together, after which Lou Alcindor changed his name to what we know him now as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And so, there's the history of 10 groups of teammates who may come off as a surprise to you. Did any of them surprise you? Interest you? Are there any pairings I perhaps may have missed that you thought of? Let me know how you felt and leave any suggestions for a sequel to this video in the comments below. Thanks for watching and listening to this NBA blurb on surprising teammates.